Hello and welcome to CRE Unscripted. I'm Rob Ondak. This is my partner Jared Oakes. With us today is our partner Eric Zalad. Eric is the co-chair of the Transportation and Logistics Group here at Bench. We asked Eric to join us today to talk about e-commerce, transportation, and logistics issues in connection with commercial real estate. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Rob.
So Eric, let's jump in. Can you tell us a little bit about how the warehouse leasing industry is faring during the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, it varies, Jared, depending on what type of warehousing the warehouser is doing. Non-essential warehouses are faring not as well as warehouses that deal with essential services and commodities. Overall, in the market, leasing activity is down about 20% from Q1. We're seeing more demand for short-term leasing, lots of tenants seeking rent relief in various forms, which we can talk about, but the rents seem to be stabilizing overall.
Okay, good. Any other major trends we're seeing in the space?
Yes, Rob mentioned e-commerce. I mean, even before COVID-19, e-commerce was changing the way logistics businesses and warehouses operate. That's accelerated with the COVID-19 era. There's a huge spike in e-commerce activity, as we probably all know from our front porches. It's about a 20% increase in activity. It's adding several hundred million square feet of warehouse space demand. And the other thing warehousers are doing, and this started also before COVID-19, is there's more automation. So I go to a lot of warehousing conferences and you see booths with companies selling drones and robotics, and so many warehouses are very automated already. But with the advent of COVID-19 and social distancing, there's a move toward even greater automation. As they do that, they have to get contractors in to do the work. Sometimes that's harder these days with getting permits because of the COVID-19 era, but it's getting done, and it really is transforming the industry on an accelerated basis.
Mm-hmm. Eric, you mentioned earlier about rent relief issues related to COVID-19. Can you speak in a little bit greater detail, specifically with respect to the warehousing sector and how COVID-19 is impacting the warehouse sector and rent relief issues that you're seeing from both the landlord and tenant perspective?
I can, Rob. So again, there's a dichotomy, right? The warehouses that service essential industries are doing a lot better than the ones who don't, which makes sense. But some of the arrangements that are being worked out between landlords and tenants include various types of rent relief, straight out reduced rent, deferrals, as I'm sure you're seeing in other commercial real estate relationships. Usually the deferral is about 3 to 6 months out. There's arrangements where the landlords are making use of security deposits as rent, and then that payment is deferred, the repayment by the tenant. It impacts space utilization, so we see a lot of renegotiation of how space is used, amount of space that is used. There's greater receptivity we're seeing towards subleasing by tenants. Landlords are giving consent where they otherwise might not have. Some flexibility as to early buyouts of leases. Greater adjustments to the space from a build out and technological standpoint are worked into these deals. Some tenants are buying the premises depending on how their business is going. And we represent a lot of warehouse owners, and we're seeing some tenants becoming very opportunistic about these arrangements, even if they're doing well. So that's something that we're alert to for warehouses we represent.
Yeah, can we talk about that for just a second, just the rationale of it? Because in the retail context, the malls are all closed completely, right? Other than if you are providing essential service or selling groceries or drugstore type operations. In the office context, they might not be closed, but there's real disruption to the use of the space. In the warehousing sector, It seems though, there may be interruption with having the ability of people to be there to do a lot of activity, but from the core business of what it is you're renting, the space to store your stuff, you're still getting that benefit from it. So a lot of times what we're seeing in the request for rent relief, especially in the retail context, is we can't use our space, therefore we should get some sort of rent deferral. Here, it's different. So are you seeing it more just as a related, there's just an overall desire to share economic pain, that the users of the space are just feeling the pain economically on their own balance sheet and income statements, so they're asking the landlords to share in that, or is there any sort of special rationale they're giving?
It's interesting, some of the non-essential warehouses that store goods related to non-essential services have pure economic situations overall that are adverse to them. Others, though, other parts of their business are impacted adversely, and the warehouse itself might be doing fine, storing goods, transacting goods in and out, but I think that a lot of the tenants are using their overall business operations to leverage some deals as to warehouses. I mean, the goods, yes, are still stored there, and the function is getting them in and out, so that the essential businesses can get them in and out. The essentials, they're stored there, and that's not necessarily good.
Yeah.
And I think this is a key point, Jared, because, and for our audience to point in on, with respect to the warehouse sector, I think the diversity of this issue is greater than you're seeing in some of the other segments of commercial real estate. So understanding the nature of the user's business and how COVID is impacting them, I think will impact the negotiations between the landlords and tenants, whether or not rent relief will be granted or not.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. The other thing that we see often is if the landlords are granting any sort of serious rent relief or deferral, in certain contexts, the landlords are using that as consideration to get other things. Are you seeing that at all in the warehousing space?
Yeah, we're seeing terms adjusted more favorably to the landlords, getting greater flexibility toward the landlords, maybe balloon payments when they want them. So yeah, it's a trade-off. And the other thing we're seeing, it's interesting really, is a little more due diligence to make sure that the other negotiating party really is in the dire straits they're saying.
Yeah.
Is that due diligence is always good, but in particular, I think it's very important in these types of discussions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So can we talk about operationally how things are being impacted?
Yes, as I said, things are going to be getting more automated, but the function of a warehouse is, of course, storage, but then, as we've said, extracting the inventory from the warehouse to be distributed to the end user. So operationally, that means a large semi-truck pulling up and being loaded with inventory. So we've helped clients with policies and regulations for that transaction, because that involves human contact, touching surfaces, and so we've helped our clients develop policies to minimize that. Drivers staying in trucks, for instance, and not going out and mingling, signage with regard to where people are permitted to go. That contradicts some federal motor carrier safety regulations. Drivers have some obligations as to making sure loads are safe before they go out on the public highway. So we've helped our clients with policies to kind of juxtapose those two regulatory landscapes. There's other policies that announce that the regulations that the warehouse itself is complying with, the steps it's taking to comply and take COVID-19 precautions. You gotta be careful of a gratuitous assumption of duty. If a warehouse actually takes upon itself COVID-19 related duties, then you gotta make sure you're complying with them, because there could be liability associated with that. Many warehouses have drivers sign in who are picking up the freight, or even photograph the trucks or the license plates, so that in case there's cargo loss or theft, they can get to the bottom of that. But these days, that could come into play in terms of contact tracing for COVID-19 exposure. So a lot of our clients are kind of refining those procedures also. They're doing a good job of adapting almost on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's really amazing the level regulatory impact on the transportation and logistics space as it relates to the use of real estate comparatively. If you think about some of our other industries, it's not quite as regulated in that way.
Absolutely. Eric, for the benefit of our audience, can you discuss some long-term trends that you see related to warehousing and the commercial real estate industry?
I can, Rob. So first of all, we think industrial warehousing, commercial warehousing will be one of the first sectors in the commercial real estate space to recover. But what also is happening as a result of COVID-19 is it's kind of accelerating and magnifying some other trends that were already taking place. First of all, last mile delivery and e-commerce, as I said, I mean, it was burgeoning before, but now that is exponentialized. So warehouses, logistics companies are going to need to adapt to an even greater demand for those types of services. And they're adapting in various types of ways. And one of the ways I think you've heard about is nano warehousing. And the whole goal in e-commerce is to get those goods closer to the end user. It's difficult to navigate in urban centers, probably even more so now. So it's more importantly than ever for e-commerce distributors to get those goods in storage close to their customers. So we're seeing a lot more of this nano warehousing, i.e. smaller warehouses closer to the city cores, closer to urban centers. And that spawns some kind of interesting regulatory issues in terms of how those packages are delivered, whether it's by standard trucks or other means, messengers, even bicycles. It also gives rise to a lot of zoning issues. Warehouses used to be out in the wide open spaces and people would welcome them to their communities. It gets a little more challenging when you're popping a nano warehouse into an urban neighborhood.
Yeah,
So,
and I think this is a really interesting trend because, to your point, some of our common preconceived notions as to the use of real estate and the segmentation of real estate, I think for our audience, it's changing and it's adapting. And as the participants in commercial real estate, understanding that adaptation and helping our clients and their properties and the users of those properties adapt to these changes, I think are really important. For instance, in the retail sector, I've already seen it, Eric, where companies like Amazon and other big movers in the e-commerce space are using parking lots to fulfill, to temporarily store their delivery vehicles and to do some sorting and short-term warehousing. So, for instance, if you have a shopping center where there's an old abandoned anchor tenant, that space could be used for e-commerce, transportation, and short-term warehousing in that last mile segment.
agreed. Yeah, the model is changing and it's changing faster now, and it's kind of exciting for us, like you too, I'm sure, because we find ourselves adapting our work and our services to the evolution of our clients' business models. So it's interesting and very fulfilling for us to help our clients out in that way.
Yeah, the one thing to be wary of in the adaptive reuse of retail in particular, especially in integrated shopping centers or malls, it's a very common use. You're seeing it a lot, but you just have to be careful on the legal side. There's a lot of governing documents that affect the shopping center or that impact the owner and how they use it. So whether it's in a reciprocal easement agreement or REA or in anchor tenant leases, there could be restrictions on the use of space for non-retail purposes or things that could trip you up in a way that you might not expect. So just be careful of that. Make sure you're reading all your documents to see if there's any impediments there.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, thank you very much for joining us, being our first special guest speaker here on CRE Unscripted. To all you at home, I hope you have a great weekend and stay safe.